Well, hello again, friends. Sorry for the podcast hiatus, but the Plaid One is back in full form for Summer Session 1 for World Regions, and I got a request to do a Plaidcast on D-Day. That's right, and I got that from the current students in World Regions, but also lots of former students and friends from around the planet who said, hey, boy, what's going on, man? There's this big deal about D-Day anniversary last week. It was June 6th. 2014 was the 70th anniversary of D-Day, and so a lot of folks were asking me, what's up with that? You know what? It's really important. And yes, I'm a few days late posting this podcast. I never would have posted it on D-Day itself, though, out of respect for the folks, perhaps up to 10,000 people who died within a 24-hour period storming the beaches in Normandy. And this is a critical event in not just 20th century history, we could argue world history, and I would say that this particular geographic area, Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, is one of the most important spaces in human history and certainly 20th century history that affects us right on up to today. Wow, that's a bold claim, Boyer. What's up with that? Let me tell you about what's up with that. We'll do a quick geography of D-Day, and then I'll tell you also why it's so important, even in today's world, this particular space on the planet that we call the beaches of Normandy. First off, what is this D-Day thing? Well, let me give you a side tangent already here in the second minute of this podcast. A lot of folks get confused about these American holidays. They're like, didn't we just celebrate Memorial Day or something? And what, is this the same as D-Day? No. Lots of folks get confused. Memorial Day in the United States, Memorial Day, the federal holiday, is paying tribute and a memorial to all U.S. soldiers that died while serving the country's military in active conflicts or even not active conflicts. If you were a U.S. soldier and you died while you were a U.S. soldier during a war or any skirmish, that is what Memorial Day is for, to respect those dead. Veterans Day is to pay tribute and honor all people from all branches of service who ever served in the U.S. military, period, whether you died or not. You see the difference between those two? D-Day, on the other hand, is, I don't think it's a U.S. federal holiday, but it's a titanic, important world event, quite frankly. World, not just U.S., because it was the day that the Allied powers, namely the United States, the U.K., Canada, and some Frenchies, banded together to turn the tide of World War II and to start taking back continental Europe, liberating it from the Nazis. Nobody likes those Nazis. And that day happened June 6, 1944. And so thus, just last week, we celebrated the 70th anniversary. It's a titanic event in a titanic place. For those non-World War II history buffs, or those not alive during the war, which is none of us, okay? This invasion by the Allied powers to liberate Europe from the Nazis was codenamed Operation Neptune. It was part of Operation Overlord. These are U.S. names for these military movements. Operation Overlord was the code name given to the entire operation, basically to defeat the Nazis in Europe. Remember, the U.S. was also fighting the Japanese over the Pacific, so this is a different part of World War II. Operation Overlord is, let's kick some Nazi ass. And get them out of there. Operation Neptune. Neptune. Isn't he the god of the ocean, the water? Yes. Operation Neptune was the mostly amphibious invasion of Normandy. And we're talking right here, the Normandy coast in northern France, to start taking back continental Europe. It is the, I believe, still today, the largest seaborne invasion in human history. That means you had 100,000 dudes, mostly dudes, I guess there's some dudettes there, although I don't think so, on hundreds and thousands of vessels crossing the English Channel from Great Britain to do this invasion in Operation Neptune. Largest seaborne invasion in human history that started to roll the tide back and beat the Nazis. 5,000 landing and assault craft were used, just by the Allied powers, not the Nazis. 289 escort vessels, and now I'm just reading this, obviously you can tell from my eyes. 277 minesweepers, 160,000 troops crossed the English Channel in less than a 24-hour period. Probably upwards of 10,000 of them died in this 24-hour period. And I never understand the statistics, but they say there's 4,414 confirmed dead, but they think probably 10,000 people died. That's because this was such an epic shit show of human death and destruction and chaos that it's hard to tell. They couldn't account for all the bodies, people missing. This is carnage that's unimaginable in today's era. Yes, we have wars in today's world, but nothing on this scale. This is like the last full-on 100,000 troops, invasion force, people shooting at each other, people dropping like flies everywhere that the world has seen. This is epic, on epic scales. And I'm not into blood and guts personally, but if you want to see the best depiction, probably the best depiction, although some think it's too violent, is Saving Private Ryan. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go watch Saving Private Ryan with Tom Hanks and just watch the first 15 minutes. Most war people and most people who served in this event say it's the most realistic depiction of storming Omaha Beach. And it is chaos, and it is scary, and people are dying everywhere. It's that big of a deal. And again, it starts to turn back the tide on the Nazis. Now let me get to, that's the event itself. Okay, that's the event. Let's get a little deeper into the geography though. What are we talking about here again? We're talking about that from 1939 to 1944, the Nazis, that is in Germany, had taken over most of what you see behind me on this map. They had stormed across continental Europe and pretty much without much fuss took over all of continental Europe. They never got Great Britain though, although they tried to bomb it into oblivion and largely did. And they were still bombing, and they had set up one of the first geographic terms I want you to know, which is the Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall was a line, a system of defenses on the Atlantic coastline that the Nazis set up all the way down, including the Normandy coast. What was this wall? Well, it was Hitler's idea, and he was batshit crazy. But the Atlantic Wall's idea was that, hey, we know that the British and or some of their friends, the United States, may try to come take back over or liberate continental Europe. So we're going to set up the Atlantic Wall, this coastline of defense, with guns and missiles and tanks, all set up in strategic areas every, 10 or 20 miles across this entire coastline of Europe. Thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of defensive structures. And we're talking 10-foot deep or 10-foot wide concrete poured walls with guns sticking out. And some of these guns were so powerful they could actually shoot guns, not aircraft, shoot guns from the Normandy coast and hit targets in Great Britain. And they had this coastline defense set up all the way down to Spain. Spain wasn't involved in the war, so they didn't have to defend Spain. And let me just do a side note here. How crazy were these people? Trying to defend 5 or 6 or 8,000 miles of coastline? You couldn't possibly have enough soldiers. You would never. The Nazis spent millions, maybe billions, of engineering and construction dollars and manpower, man hours to try to defend thousands of miles of coastline. It's folly. And if you don't believe it's folly, you could actually liken this to today's war on drugs. You can't possibly defend all of your coastline. It's like the war on immigration in the United States. You can't possibly seal the U.S.-Mexican border. Not 100%. So right from the get-go, this idea is almost preposterous, but the Nazis were industrious folks. And so they did their best, and they did a damn good job constructing a line of death called the Atlantic Wall, again, with the intent on repelling any invasion by Great Britain and its allies, namely the United States. Everybody knew this was coming. Again, for those of you that don't know any World War II history, the Germans declared war on the United States, who was actually playing no role in this war whatsoever up to that point. And the Nazis, in all their infinite wisdom, said, well, we're just going to declare war on the United States too. And the U.S. said, okay, you want some of this? You want some of this? All right, yeah, sure, we'll provide some of that. And some of that resulted in the Normandy invasion, Operation Neptune, in 1944. So the U.S., with its allies, the U.K. and Canada, had started sending over supplies and troops. Again, you're looking at 160,000 troops were massed just across the English Channel in Great Britain. The Nazis, even though they were evil, they weren't stupid, and they knew this was coming. Everybody knew it was coming. You declared war on the United States. Of course they're going to respond. And the Nazis had intelligence. They saw all the troops coming over and the masses and what was happening and people training. So everybody knew this fight was getting ready to happen. It wasn't a mystery invasion. And in fact, for months prior to D-Day, the actual event when Operation Neptune took effect, the Americans and our British counterparts had set up all these ruses, had sent out fake communications that the invasion's happening tomorrow, the invasion's happening next week. They would parachute in dummies here and there to distract the Nazis and say, oh, they're going to attack over here. Oh, no, they're going to invade over here, to try to get them off balance. And it kind of largely worked. Now, back to the geography part of the D-Day event itself. The Nazis logically assumed that if you're going to move in hundreds of thousands of troops to liberate Europe, you actually need a very good port. This is highly undervalued in today's world because none of us are on the ocean, none of us are on boats very often, but ports are crucial. Ports are crucial for the economic lifeblood of any country, even in today's world. I mean, we live in a very modern world, but most stuff still moves on the ocean. And if you're going to have a big economy or a powerful economy or export stuff or import stuff, you kind of still need a really great port. So ports, although we never think about them, are still quite crucial geography in today's world. And they certainly are during wartime. So the Nazis logically assumed, oh, you guys are going to move in a couple 100,000 troops and a shit ton of tanks and weaponry and stuff. You're going to have one of our good ports to get into Europe. They knew, because of geography, everybody knew that this was the best place, probably right here on the Straits of Dover, because it's the shortest line from Great Britain to France. Everybody assumed it's going to be here in Calais. That's going to be the place because the Allied powers can get across the English Channel really quickly there at Calais. Hell, it's probably only like 10 or 20 miles. And there's a decent port there. And if not there, they're going to go over here to Le Havre, France, which is in Normandy. Really big port facility there. Right there at the River Seine, where the Seine, which flows through Paris, empties out. In fact, this is the Bay of Seine, or Seine, I think it's pronounced in French. So everyone assumed they have to take a really good port facility to move all this stuff in, and it's going to be Calais because it's close, or Le Havre because it's big. And again, the Allied powers were massing here. There's 100, 200, 300,000 troops hanging out here. Everybody knew this was happening, and the Nazis had did their best to build this Atlantic wall with defensive structures and troops every 5 or 10 miles, whatever it was. But they really heavily fortified the port facilities because they logically figured everybody needs that. They're going to have to get one of those port facilities. And that's where the Nazis are wrong, and where the United States shows its awesomeness. Because I'm sure the Brits and the Canadians helped out with this too, but they chose these beaches in between, actually just south of Le Havre, the major port, that didn't have a really great port facility. There was no natural port, and there was no built ports in much of the beaches that they ended up storming during D-Day. And they did it precisely because they assumed those would be less fortified, less protected, that was where it would be a weaker section of the Atlantic Wall defense structure that the Nazis had built. And they were right. It was still heavily defended, though, through some intricacies of history that I won't get into. Now, it was Omaha Beach particularly was slightly more defended than they assumed it was going to be. But it was basically countryside, no major city there and no major port facility. So they knew it was a soft target to get in, and that's exactly what they did. And June 6, 1944, the call was made after months of planning and months of, they didn't pick the date till the last second. It was based on the tide tables and lunar stuff and how much vision they would have at night, depending on if it was a full moon or a half moon. So it was a floating target of when they were going to do this. The weather cleared enough for them to do it on June 6, 1944, and they said, that's it. Dwight Eisenhower, in command of this, U.S. guy, said, and future president, said, done. Operation Neptune is on. And that, my friends, is when it started. And by dawn that day, the bloodbath began, because these Nazi positions, were some of them heavily fortified, at least all of them decently fortified. And what you had with this Allied power, and I'm going to put up a map here, is that all of these 160,000 troops and 5,000 to 6,000 vessels all took off basically at midnight to cross the English Channel and attack these beaches, the soft flank beaches in between the major port facilities that they were hoping to capture within the days. And the joint force was obviously Americans, British, and Canadians. And they divided up this stretch of beach into code names. Of course, it's all military, so Operation Overlord was the code name for taking back Europe. Operation Neptune is the code name for the actual D-Day event itself, the actual storming of the Normandy Beaches to start Operation Overlord. And then they codenamed the beaches, and different groups took different beaches. And I know this starts to get into war trivia, but bear with me and learn some of this stuff. The beaches ran from, we'll start from the west and go east. There was Utah Beach, and these are names you probably heard of. And these are just sections of beach that the Allies named these quadrants, and they said, okay, you guys take this section, you'll take this section, you'll take this section. So these aren't natural names. These weren't names that were already there. These are military code names. The United States took Utah Beach and Omaha Beach, and now we're going from west to east. Utah, then Omaha were the United States. Gold and Sword beaches were the British, and in between Gold and Sword was Juno, and Juno was the Canadians. Now the British got in with fighting. Obviously, they took some losses, but they got in fairly quickly to, I believe, Sword, and Gold was not too bad either. The Canadians got Juno in fairly short order. Utah was a bit of a fight because I think that's the one that has like the cliffs that people had to scale up to get to the top and to take out these guns. And Omaha is the one that's most famous, and that's the one you will definitely visit when you go to Normandy, which I highly recommend, because this is the one that was really the biggest bloodbath. Because of the geography, because the Nazis had put mines and barriers and all this barbed wire and crap on the beaches, and there was kind of a smaller cliffs that you could look right down on the beach, and they had put bunkers in there with big guns shooting down. This is where the real bloodbath took place. Yes, there was losses on all 5 beaches, but Omaha is kind of the most infamous because the death toll was, I think, a couple thousand literally within 3 hours. And again, I think most best depicted in Saving Private Ryan. There's another great old war film that was made in like 1950 called The Longest Day. So go watch these back to back. The Longest Day. It's a war film, so the people die, but it's from 1950, so it's not uber violent. The Longest Day shows all of the operations as it's unfolding the 24 hours before. And Saving Private Ryan is more of a realistic, good old-fashioned bloodbath war film. This is what war looks like. And again, both of them kind of focus in on this actual event, Operation Neptune, and Omaha Beach is where Saving Private Ryan starts. And they get it pretty good for geography. It looks like that, it is like that, and it was so hard to penetrate from the Allied forces because of the geography and the way it was set up. So that is D-Day, okay? Yes, the Allied forces worked together. Yes, there was losses of up to 10,000 people in a day. Yes, the U.S. took the biggest brunt of the death toll within the first few hours at Omaha Beach. But it worked. And that's why this is the beginning of the end of the Nazi regime. It wasn't like, a walk in the park after that. You still had the Battle of the Bulge and another year's worth of bloodbath fighting across Europe to kill all the Nazis, or at least to get them to surrender. But this is where it starts. And this is why that day is so special. And this is why that day is so commemorated. And this is why that day changes history that we are still playing out into today's world. Dig the geography of D-Day now, because this is when the Nazis start to end. And now let's back it up. And you have the rebirth of modern-day Europe. That Belgium becomes a free state again, and Norway becomes a free state again. And Germany is occupied by the Allied powers, including Russia, by the way. Let's not forget, Russia did not participate directly in D-Day. But, and I do want you to know this, I'll ask you a test question on this, but Eisenhower and all of the Allied command had asked Joseph Stalin, that's right, whack-ass crazy commie Joseph Stalin, they had asked him to increase troop movement on the Eastern Front in order to distract and draw off Nazi forces from the Western Front. And Stalin agreed, said, yes, of course. So you guys are getting ready to do this D-Day? Okay. Then we're going to make it more painful for the Nazis over here in the East, and therefore they're going to have to divert troops and resources. And that's exactly what happened. So yes, Russia was an ally of the United States and Great Britain and France during World War II. Of course, right after that, we all hated each other for the entire duration of the Cold War, but they were on our side, and the Russians played an ultra-critical component of World War II. Still overlooked in today's world, in today's U.S. history books. I think it's still given short shrift that the Russian contribution was gigantic for World War II success for the Allied powers. It was an absolute bloodbath the whole 5 years on the Eastern Front, where the Russians were fighting the Nazis over there. Perhaps 10 to 20 million Russians died. 10 to 20 million. I just said that 10,000 died during D-Day. 10 to 20 million Russians died. So their contribution, even to the D-Day events, even though they didn't participate personally, they were a huge distraction force for the Nazis that played a critical component of the success of the D-Day operation itself. So then you had the beachhead was established by the Allied powers there in Normandy. The Russians are coming in from the other side, and they had been for years. And everybody then starts crushing the Nazis from east and west. Cool? D-Day is where it all starts for the western side of this front to eliminate the Nazis. And again, at the end of the war, 1945, everybody high-fives in the middle of Europe. We draw the Iron Curtain, and then we divide up Europe and hate each other. And that gets back to, let me finish this rant by stepping back and saying, this piece of property is perhaps the most important geographic space on planet Earth for the last 70 years. And you could argue 1,000 years. And what do I mean by this? 1,000 years? Well, hell, you just said D-Day only happened 70 years ago. That's true. But think about what little history you know about Europe and dig this property once more. The Normandy Beaches here, and I don't know if I said this at the beginning of the podcast, but this is a beautiful place to visit. Some of the D-Day monuments are awesome. The museums are awesome. But the French countryside, this is where like the lifestyles of the rich and famous French go to a vacation nowadays, is Normandy. It's apple cider country, hard cider country. It's a beautiful place. It's quaint, but it has great museums and it's enriched with history. And now we can get back to why is this an important place for Western civilization and the world as a whole. Well, first off, Normandy is one of these awesomely undervalued spaces in terms of it really has played a huge role in European and world history in terms of this is the place where the Norman conquest was launched from. Where the Normans on the Normandy coast, go figure, the Norman conquest of England, the Norman conquest of the British Isles. And I don't even know enough European history to tell you how many dozens of wars were fought over the English Channel between the Brits and the French, or the Normans and the Brits, or the English and the Normans. You also have the Normandy Beaches as a place where Vikings, even 1,200 years ago, were invading from Scandinavia and coming into France. And the Frenchies, well, they weren't French at the time, were repelling the Scandinavians. So this little area has seen serious action for 1,000 years and shaped all of European history. And then you pull it up to the D-Day invasion that I've now ranted about for 23 minutes. And let me end on this. This space is still affecting today's world. How? Well, what I consider the most important part of D-Day and the invasion of Normandy, Operation Neptune, part of Operation Overlord, is just this. And this is often overlooked. I didn't hear any world leaders talking about this during the D-Day celebrations last week. This beach, dig this, my friends, this beach, Omaha, Utah, Sword, Gold, Juneau, this stretch of beach in northern France is where the modern world started, where the modern European world started, where many of the most important international organizations on planet Earth today, this is where it started. I'm just going to say Omaha Beach because I love Omaha Beach. It's just drenched with history and blood and suffering and liberation and human emotion and human experience. That's all at Omaha. Omaha Beach has shaped the modern world. How so? It's at this beach, at this invasion 70 years ago, that Team West gets formed. I'm going to stop for just a minute to let you mull that over. For those of you that have taken my class before, for those of you that are in my class right now, for those that may see this in the future 100 years from now, June 6, 1944 is when the modern world started for organizations like the European Union, the United Nations, and NATO. They all started at Omaha. Now, that's a bold statement. I don't care. I make bold statements. Yes, there's lots of other things going on. Yes, there are other important points, blah, 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 blah. It started here. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the US and UK were allies before this. Yes, the US had no problem with Belgium before this. Yes, we're on again, off again. The Brits and the Americans sometimes like the French, don't like the French. This is where you have it. This juncture in history at this specific place is where all of these players, for the first time, truly unite, and that hasn't changed since they united that day. Yeah, they were working beforehand, but I'm thinking symbolically here. This is the place where France, the UK, Canada, and the United States said, we have to work together. We were friends before this, but we actually need to bind into something more than friends in order to liberate Europe and get them out of there, get those Nazis out of there. And now you can start to play it forward over the next few years after the Nazis are defeated. This team, again, this is the birth of Team West. This team says, oh, well, we could play it old school like most of us nation states have done in history. We've defeated the Nazis. We've crushed Germany. We could put them under our boot heel and kick the shit out of them for the next 50 years until they get powerful enough to attack us again. We could do the same thing with Japan. That has been most of the experience for humans for most of their history. Defeat your enemy, destroy them as much as possible, really crush them in embarrass them, and then go about your business, which is why the Nazis rose back up again, quite frankly. Germany was defeated in World War I. These powers had worked together in World War I, but I'm suggesting they were never unified until this day in World War II. So what we did differently, we, Team West, is they united really for the first time and said, we need to stay united. And then when they defeated their enemy, Germany, which was also part of Europe, instead of crushing them under their boot heel of destruction, which they did after World War I, which is why the Germans got so pissed off they did World War II, instead of doing that again, they said, let's bring them into the fold. We got a pretty solid team here. That D-Day worked. Us uniting to liberate an entire continent called Europe worked. So instead of flipping off our enemies and crushing them, let's pull them in to this club. Hey, Germany, why don't you be part of our team? Hey, Italy, you should be part of this team. Hey, you know what? Let's ensure that we don't fight anymore. Let's economically tie ourselves together in this thing called the European Union. Hey, let's ensure we won't fight anymore amongst ourselves. Let's develop an awesome defensive structure called NATO. And think what NATO stands for, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic. There are other NATO members like Turkey who have no Atlantic frontage, but the essence of this was we're in the Atlantic, the US, Canada, and all of these European powers. We're all brothers and sisters. Come on, what are we waiting for? Let's unite together. 1944, in my mind, is where all that starts. And it starts right there. Everybody says, you know what? We actually have a lot more in common than we don't with each other. Why have we been fighting for 1,000 years? It all unifies in Normandy at this event. And it's been rolling ever since. Here we are 70 years later. NATO, which had taken it on the chin here in the last few years because nobody wanted to fund it anymore. The European powers especially were like, well, our economy sucks, so we don't really want to pay into NATO as much. Oh, and then Russia just invaded the Crimean Peninsula and took it over. Oh, wait a minute. We're all united again. Oh, no. NATO's going nowhere. 70 years running now. NATO's still there, possibly stronger than ever. I was saying 70, 65. NATO wasn't formed until 49. But still, NATO was formed because of D-Day. The EU is formed because of D-Day. The EU is the richest single organization on planet Earth. If you combine all the GDP of all the countries in the EU, it's even richer than the US economy. And there has not been a World War III. And there has not even been a hint that any of these countries would ever attack each other again. That's the strength and success of Team West, a unified entity that is unified 70 years ago for D-Day and has been unified since. Sorry, you guys know how I roll. I get my blood pressure all up. It's just that important. We oft overlook these old things like, well, that happened a long time ago, and that doesn't really affect things in today's world. Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. And again, I said this for people who read the book or taken my class before. I reference this thing called Team West all the time. Not that many other people do. I like to think I'm an original on that. And this is the birth, this place and this date is the birthplace of Team West. A entity that is still, let's just be honest, still the strongest single entity that the world has ever seen. You could say the U.S. is the strongest military, and you'd be right. NATO is stronger, though. Unified. Dozens of countries unified economically and militarily and increasingly politically. That's D-Day, my friends. June 6, 1944. That's where it all started. Fascinating geography of the battle itself. More fascinating for how it's affected 20th century and 21st century events and continues to because of this united effort by formerly fighting powers into a unified whole that now collaborates on all things military, all things economic, and increasingly all things political. Because they're saying, wait a minute, our threats aren't each other. They might be Russia. They might be China. They might be some other entity that rises. They might be terrorism. And this unit works together on all these things. But I've ranted for a half an hour now on the geography of D-Day. Hope you learned a little bit about the event itself, a little bit about World War II, and a lot bit more about why it's so crucial for the 70 years since. But for now, party on.